Perhaps the two most misunderstood, or maybe the two most misused words in Christianity are these: faith and believe. Now, in the secular world, we know what these two words mean. Faith is complete trust or confidence in something, and to believe means to accept something as true. And our belief is based on two things: the evidence and the person. So, if a credible person produces compelling evidence, we believe and therefore put our confidence and trust or faith in that. A great example of this is trusting a doctor's diagnosis and treatment plan, right? So you have your evidence. You may not feel well, and after running tests like blood work, scans, etc., the doctor presents clear evidence of what's wrong. And then that person, your doctor, is a trained professional with years of experience and credibility, and you take their credibility seriously. And because of both of the evidence, test results, and the credibility of the doctor, you believe their diagnosis. And if you truly believe, you will act on the following prescription treatment that they prescribe. And that is putting your faith in them. Pretty simple, right? So, why is it not that simple when it comes to faith and belief in the church? Why is it not that simple when it comes to our theology? For some reason, these words get hijacked when it comes to theology. All of a sudden, these words take on some kind of special meaning. All of a sudden, we eliminate reason and we insert this make believe hope. Think about when you were growing up and first heard about God. You were trying to decide what you believed so that you could put your faith in God. But what did we hear when we were growing up? Just put your faith in God and believe in Him. But that's it. Put your faith in God and believe in Him. And at first, they made it sound like it was so simple. And so you're like, yeah. But then as you grew up, you started to have questions. And so you asked those questions, and they couldn't fully answer those questions. And so what did they say? Well, you just need more faith. But that doesn't make any sense at all. Because when it comes to faith in the practical sense, you either have faith or you don't. When you go in the morning and you start your car, you either trust or have faith that your car will start every time you push the button, or you don't. I don't assume that the amount of faith I have in my car will make it start or cause it not to start. But that's exactly what they said to you when you had questions about your faith. You just need more faith. Or when it became to your beliefs, they said, well, your belief just needs to go deeper. Now, this is one that's particularly triggering for me as a pastor and as a PK, because I can't tell you how many times I heard people say that the answer to the problem, or what I was feeling, was that you just needed to go deeper in your walk for God. By the way, here's what they meant by going deeper: have yourself an experience. Oh, you're struggling with your beliefs? Well, you just need to ask less questions and pray a little longer. Have you tried fasting? Have you heard about our family camp or our upcoming revival? Or, oh, you know what you need? We have this super great conference coming up with this super great speaker, and you need to sign up or buy a ticket to it. But belief is based on evidence. The only way to go deeper is through a systematic analysis of the data, not an experience, not a summer camp with a Thursday night special, not a revival or a conference with 8 multicultural speakers. And here lies the problem. Frank Turek puts it this way: the reason so many people are so easily talked out of Christianity is because they were never talked into it in the first place. How many of us were taken through the hoops of church with very little explanation? How many of us were told to believe in something that was never actually explained to us? How many of us were told to trust something, but we were never given the handlebars so that we could actually grasp it? I can hear your and see your head nod through the camera right now. That's most of us. And then we grew up and some things didn't line up. I mean, the pastor said that, like David, we would slay every giant if we just had faith. And then the giants started coming, and guess what? They started to win. The Sunday school teacher said, ask and you shall receive. And when we got older, we prayed for some really big things. And not only did we not get what we wanted, we got stuff we didn't want. So we had questions and the church had no answers. And not only that, but you started to watch YouTube videos and TikToks and reels of people deconstructing their faith. And they had better answers than your Sunday school teacher did. They seem to understand the history and the context and the data and the verses and the stories better than your pastor did. So you started to ask questions of new people, and you read books and listened to podcasts, and they had more evidence and seemed more trustworthy than any church leader, parent, or Sunday school teacher that told you to just have faith and to just believe a little deeper. So I just explained your last 30 years of faith struggles, and I want you to know if that's you, you have come to the right place because I've been there and I've worked through all that. But here's the good news. The apostles that walked side by side with Jesus, the authors of our New Testament letters, if they could reach through this camera and they could talk to you, they would tell you that they never expected anyone to just walk by faith or to just believe a little deeper after a special service or experience. They never expected anyone to believe out of eternal fear or moral motivation. They wanted you to follow the signs. Take the Apostle John, for instance. John would tell you, when I followed Jesus, it had nothing to do with faith or belief. John would tell you, to be honest with you, I didn't know what to believe till way later down the line. And I didn't trust any of it until I saw a man walk out of a grave. John would tell you that he left his father's fishing business and followed a 30-year-old carpenter turned rabbi because of what he saw. Not because of faith or beliefs. It was because he had evidence. He saw and heard and experienced things that made him eventually put his faith in a person and believe everything that he taught and believe everything he claimed was true. How do I know John would say all that? Because at the end of his life, he sat down and he dictated a letter to a scribe. And you know it as the Gospel of John. But at the end of his gospel, John says, and it was written down, the mission statement of this letter. He says in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John doesn't say, I put my faith in Jesus and I hope you do too. It's way better than that. He says, Jesus performed many signs, and I've written them down for a purpose. I am building a case so that you may believe. Believe in what, John? That Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And by believing, you may have life in his name. In other words, the sequence that brought him to have faith is this. There are events that acted as signs, and those signs pointed to evidence that we can all believe and ultimately put our trust in. So, over the next 6 weeks, we are going to look at the 7 signs Jesus performed. Now, we would call them miracles, but John calls them signs, and he does this for a very specific reason. He could have called them miracles, but he says they're much more than that. They're not just miracles. They're not magic tricks. These are supernatural acts of Jesus. The healings and the walking on water, They weren't random acts of kindness, and they weren't magic tricks. He wasn't just showing off. These were put in place to be signs that pointed to something we could believe and put our faith in. Who Jesus was. These miracles were for them and are for generations to come. Signs to point people to the identity of Jesus. So if you're a person who gets caught up on or enamored with miracles, I want to say something to you real quick. John doesn't want us to get enamored with the miraculous, but instead he wants us to be enamored with the one who the miracles point to. So sign number one, you probably already know this one. Everyone did back then. By the time that John decided to write this down, it had been used in Christian teaching so many times that it's actually old. He doesn't even give it a name, but everybody knew it. The first sign was this: turning water into wine. Now, John chapter 2, verse 1, John talks about what happened on this day. It says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. So let's break this down. A wedding was taking place. Mary was there. And Mary wasn't just there as a guest. We know through historical context that she was actually on the catering team. Maybe she was working the event. Maybe she was helping out a friend. But she's there, and Jesus got an invite as well, which meant, well, the whole posse was going to go. And back then, weddings weren't just a one-day event. I mean, they took days. They lasted an entire week. And that sets us up for what happened next. In John chapter 2, verse 3, it says, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Now, they ran out of wine. This was a huge deal, worse than it actually sounds. I mean, this would be like running out of cake. This would be like having a kid's birthday party and running out of ice cream. I mean, there's no more. What in the world are we going to do? This party can't continue unless something can be done. And Mary is in this role where she's on the catering team, and this is her responsibility. So this is embarrassing, and it looks bad. So what is she going to do? She runs over to her son. Now, this is so interesting because clearly Mary knew that in a pinch, she could turn to her son, that he could actually do something about this, which makes you wonder what happened in that house growing up. I mean, like one day, did they just run out of eggs and Mary was like, hey, go ahead, do your thing. And Jesus was like, don't worry, Mom, I got you. And then eggs just started popping out. I mean, we have no idea, but somehow Mary knew that she could turn to Jesus and he could do something about it. So she goes over to her boy and says, they're out of wine. And Jesus' response is quite interesting. Jesus says to his mother in John chapter 2, verse 4, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my honor has not yet come. His mother then said to his servants, do whatever he tells you. Now, I want to break this whole thing down. I know it sounds disrespectful of Jesus to turn to his mother and say, woman, but actually the Greek word used here is a term of respect. So really what Jesus says to her is, ma'am, why are you involving me? And probably what he was doing in this moment was his mother is involving him in this party. And quite honestly, it doesn't match up with what Jesus wants to do. And so he politely turns to his mother and is like, ma'am, instead of going like, but Jesus has a reason for not wanting to perform a miracle or a sign right now. He says, my hour has not yet come. This is how it would kind of play out today. Mom, ma'am, I have come to save the world, not a wedding. This is not how I plan to come out to the world and begin to point the signs to who I am. In a couple days, there's a little boy and I'm going to heal him. And that is supposed to be the first miracle, the first sign and it's going to be awesome and everyone's going to remember it. So, no, I'm not going to bail you out of a party and provide happy hour for everyone. They're going to talk about what I do with this kid for thousands of years, and I'd rather stick with that and that story than, the first sign or miracle of me coming out and telling everybody about the new kingdom and the covenant is, the first thing Jesus ever did, he got everybody drunk at a party. But Mary, like most mothers, she knows that Jesus is going to be a good boy and do as he's told. So she doesn't really listen to it. She walks off, and as she's walking away, she says to the servants, whatever he tells you to do, just do it. And Jesus probably went, It would have been excusable for John to just skip over this one, right? I mean, think about John who's writing this gospel down. What if he was telling this story and he just decided, you know what, let's not talk about Jesus providing all that alcohol at that party. Let's start with that boy who Jesus heals, right? I mean, that would have been a whole lot sexier. But actually, it was a great one to start with, because something that Jesus does, he takes this moment at this party, and as silly as it sounds, and as many jokes as we make about it, Jesus turning water into wine, it's actually one of the most perfect signs that he performed. And this is what he did. John chapter 2, verse 6, it says that nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Here's what you may not know. The family who was hosting this wedding were very good Jews, and they had these ceremonial jars, but these ceremonial jars weren't just used for anything. They were used for ceremonial washing. See, the Jewish law, the Old Testament, the Old Covenant had a strict procedure in place for washing so that everyone remained ceremonial clean. So think of these jars as like righteous church hardware that you dare not desecrate. Kind of like the Catholics' bird bath thing, or the Methodist altars, or Mrs. Lily's piano. These jars were sacred and set apart for a holy ceremony. These were icons in the Old Covenant, and every good Jewish family had some. And that's what makes this sign so insane and so meaningful. Jesus says, oh, look, there's those ceremonial sacred icons over there, those jars. You know what I'm going to do with those sacred religious things? I'm going to make party juice in them. And that's exactly what he does. In John chapter 2, verses 7 through 8, it says that Jesus said to the servants, fill those jars with water. And so they filled them to the brim. This is what I love about Jesus. He never wasted a moment. Mom was going to make him do a miracle. Fine by him. But that miracle was going to have a point to it. So what did Jesus do? He decided to use something in place as a sign of what he was going to replace. Jesus saw the sacred icon, this old covenant tool of the law of Moses, and thought, you know what? I'm coming to replace this. This is going to go away. This is going to become obsolete. And I'm going to make it clear to everybody that there's a new king here, and that the new king is done with these icons. I'm going to show them that I had the ultimate authority by using what the law of Moses deemed as sacred, and I'm going to take it and use it as a pot for making wedding drinks in. I can do that because I'm the king, and the old is becoming obsolete, and I'm replacing it with something new, because that's exactly what Jesus came to do. He was coming to replace the old, because the old covenant was coming to an end and its time was up. And these jars, they were going to be replaced along with everything else. The temple system, the law, the entire sacrificial system. F.F. Bruce said it this way: the water provided for purification as laid down by Jewish law and custom stands for the whole ancient order of Jewish ceremony, which Christ was to replace with something better. In verse 8, it says this: Then he told them, the servants, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. And they did just that. So they take the jars to the master of the banquet. This was like in Master Chef when they work at the restaurant and before the food goes out, they bring it to Gordon Ramsay, the head chef, so that he can inspect it. So they go and they take these jars of water to the master of the ceremony. And in John chapter 2, verse 9, this is what he says. It says, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine, and he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside. And this is amazing. This next line is life-changing. You've probably read past this and never given it a second thought, but this is so good. Are you ready for this? In John chapter 2, verse 10, then they said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. See, at a party like this, you bring out the good stuff first, and then once everyone has gotten a little drunk, and it doesn't really matter, then you bring out the bad stuff. Then you bring out the stale, less full, less sweet, not so good stuff, because no one really cares at that point because they've had a little bit too much to drink. But the master of the banquet says, wow, look at this. You have saved the best for last. Two reasons why I think John told us this. Number one, this was a sign. This was a sign that God was bringing the best to the people. The Old Testament was a stage that was set for the new. God, through Israel, set up a covenant with the intention of replacing it. The original wine was about to be replaced with the better wine. And Jesus was saying in that moment, that's right, guys. Something better is here. Something new has come. Taste it, drink it in. It is sweeter, it is fuller, it is stronger, it is better. If you think God was doing something awesome, well, let me tell you something. He's just getting started. But here's what else I think he was telling us. I think John was trying to tell us today. And that is what it was like to follow Jesus. Isn't it true that we always think that our best days are behind us? We always talk about, oh, back in the day, the good old days, man, when I was young, when I was in my prime. I mean, we look at life as something that gets older and staler and cheaper. But John is trying to tell us something. With Jesus, life only gets better. John, if he could be here today, he would say, man, when we followed Jesus, we thought our life was good, but we followed him and it just kept getting richer, fuller, sweeter, and more valuable. John's trying to tell us today, with Jesus, the best is yet to come. And that should give your life purpose and value and fullness today. I found this to be true in my own life. There was a point in time where my life, I would describe it as great. And then there were twists and turns and things happened and I suffered loss and I suffered heartache and I had to totally regroup my life. And for a while I thought, man, my life is never going to be the same again. My life is never going to be as good as it used to be. And maybe you're going through that. Maybe you have suffered loss or you're grieving and you're thinking, man, it's never going to be the same again. My life is never going to be as good as it used to be. And I get that. I've been there. I've thought those thoughts. But then this past week, something happened. I had a period of 5 days where God's grace just showed up in my life. And God opened doors and spoke to me. And honestly, I found myself in a place where I was the happiest I have probably been in over a decade. I had encounters with people where I felt like God was using me and speaking through me. And I had this renewed sense of purpose and clarity in my life today. And there are things that I've healed from, that I hid for years and years and years. And I'm telling you all this because for some of you, you're very focused on the good old days. And you're convinced that it's never going to be as good as it used to be. But let me tell you something. Let me reiterate what John was trying to say. When you follow Jesus, be ready to be surprised. With Jesus, life can get richer and fuller and sweeter and more valuable. Usually life brings out the best first, but with Jesus, he saves the best till now. When your back's against the wall, when the enemy thinks you're defeated, when it seems like the party is over, that's when Jesus starts serving the good stuff. And that's what I believe Jesus is going to do in your life. It's not over. It's just about to get real good. And John, he wraps it up this way. John 2, verse 11. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This was more than a miracle. This was a sign. And the sign was evidence that Jesus was worth following. And maybe it's the sign you need today, that Jesus wants to take your old life and transform it into the best life it can be. That Jesus wants to take your old faith and transform it into the best that it can be. A life and faith that when people get a taste of you, they go, boom, hey, we thought you were getting stale, but it turns out here comes the good stuff. If that's what you've been looking for, then this is your sign. This is your evidence. This is John's case study to you. And his hope is that because of this sign, you would believe. And your belief would convince you to put your faith, your trust in Jesus Christ. John, if he were here today, he would say, look, you don't need more faith. You don't just need to go deeper with your beliefs. I'm telling you, I've lived it. I've walked it. I've seen what Jesus does. And if you think that the best is behind you and that there's nothing good ahead of you, I'm telling you, you're wrong. Jesus wants to bring out the good stuff in your life. Jesus wants to take what is stale and old, and he wants to unleash something new. The disciples believed in him. They put their trust in Jesus. But why? The reason they believed was because there was a reason to believe. Before this series is over, my prayer is that you would believe and have life in his name. But not because you just took it by faith, but because you took it from the evidence from John. And if you were talked out of Christianity, it's because, quite honestly, you were never talked into it in the first place. And I want to talk you into something so that you're never talked out of it again. Jesus is here to offer you something new. Jesus wants to transform your life into something better. Would you consider letting go of your old life? Would you consider right now, not out of blind faith, but because the testimony of what you've heard? And if you believe, would you consider putting your faith in Jesus and following him? Father God, so many of us were never talked into Christianity. We were never shown the signs or the evidence. But God, as we dive into the Gospel of John and we dive into these signs, God, it's very clear that through your Son, Jesus Christ, you started to build a case, put in front of us the evidence so that we would believe, so that we would put our trust and confidence fully in you. God, would we reimagine and rediscover you? For some of us, for the first time, but for some of us, a second time or even a third time in our life, God, would we see and identify the real you? God, for some of us this morning who are in a dark place, who are in a place that have believed that the party is over and the good days are behind us, and from here on out, it just gets staler and harder and darker. God, would we believe this morning that with you, that's not true, that with you, we're just getting started. With you, there are many more good days to come. Would you revitalize all of us in the same way that you have revitalized me, God? Would you send a clear message to all of us this morning in our hearts that the party is just getting started? If you thought what was good before, wait till you see what God does next. God, build that in us. Put that confidence in us. Help us to hold on to that truth, that evidence, so that we can fight sometimes the dark thoughts in our minds and in our hearts, God. Lord, will you do that for every single one of us? And would we have the courage to begin to put our faith in you? In your name we pray.